Welcome back to Vivid Noise, and I have a bit of a confession to make. I have spent an embarrassingly long amount of my life not having any experience with Pac-Man. You know, one of the most classic video game characters of all time. I knew who he was even as a kid, but I just never played the games, not even the Pac-Man World games, which you'd think I would have played because they were on PS2 and all of my friends had PS2s, and they were on PC, well, the second and third one. But it wasn't until 2010 when Championship Edition DX came out that I actually got to experience playing a Pac-Man game. And what an introduction. Championship Edition DX takes steps towards updating the formula in a way that doesn't feel like, blatant modernization and oversimplification. It simply adds a lot more energy to the game and its presentation and new mechanics. In fact, the combination of said presentation and mechanics is what makes this game one of the most addicting things I've ever played. And actually, I want to talk about that for a little bit. So ever since I was a kid, even though my parents would tell me that like, oh, you're addicted to video games and stuff, I actually wouldn't play them for a very long amount of time. In fact, I still don't play games for long periods of time. That's just how I am. And this didn't change even when I got my first like actual modern phone, which could play the mobile games we know today. Because even though those games were specifically designed, meticulously crafted to get you addicted and to then have you spend money on them, maybe I just have a case of the Donkey Kong and I'm just too stupid to be controlled by it, but it didn't work for me. I would play them for, maybe a couple weeks, maybe a month at most, and then I just get bored, delete them, and move on to the next thing, or just go back to playing, actual real computer video games, if you know what I mean. I don't think I ever even considered trying to convince my parents to buy me any of those microtransaction extra stuff that you get in those games, because honestly, it just never held my attention enough to justify it. As in, even back then, I knew that I was only going to spend about maybe a few more days on the game before I delete it, so what's the point? And this brings me to the game in question, Pac-Man Championship Edition DX. I swear to God, this game is a legal drug. The mechanics, the game flow, the pacing, the presentation, it makes for one of the most highly concentrated rushes of dopamine you could ever achieve on a screen. So let's start with the gameplay. What does this game do so differently that makes it so much more addicting than the original Pac-Man? Well, first, there's obviously a matter of the game's speed. Instead of it being set in stone, the game speed is constantly increasing with the points that you collect, and it almost acts as a reward for doing well, because if you die at any point, the game speed goes back down, not only to punish you, you don't have to play the game slower, but it kind of also acts as a bit of a break, it lets you catch your breath for a bit before you ramp things back up. This single addition flips the dynamic of Pac-Man on its head by making the game more focused on being able to adapt to the constantly changing speed. But in order to keep things manageable, there's two extra additions that have been made to allow the player to essentially get away with mistakes, but it's not too forgiving though. The first of which is the slow motion that kicks in whenever you get a little bit too close to a ghost. This gives you that little bit of time you might need to correct your course and avoid having to use the crutch that is the bomb. Nice little segue there, right? Yeah, the bomb is the second addition that this game makes to keep the speed from getting too overwhelming. It essentially acts like a semi-screen nuke. It gets rid of all the ghosts that are currently chasing you or whatever might be in front of you. I gotta admit, I think the bombs are a tiny bit overpowered because of just how easy they are to acquire, because you not only get them after collecting a certain number of points, but they also spawn inside of certain ghosts, and when you eat them, you get the bomb. Overall, I find that the difficulty of Pac-Man Championship Edition DX is significantly lower than of the arcade original, but to be fair, that is to be expected. This is a home console release after all, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think I would have gotten so into this game if I was just constantly dying and didn't really feel like there was a point in playing. That's not to say that I don't think there's a point in playing hard games, absolutely not. I mean, just check out my Super Meat Boy or N++ videos, but because Pac-Man is such an abstract game in its mechanics, you don't really have that physics-based movement like you would have in Meat Boy or N. There's a lot of different things the game has to do to keep your dopamine levels up. And as far as the most singularly satisfying thing you can do in this game goes, it would absolutely have to be the conga line system. So you can already tell by the footage that in this game, the ghosts actually follow you and create this rainbow-colored line behind you. This is another thing that Championship Edition DX does to separate itself from the original, and in a way that makes it infinitely more addicting to play. So first of all, there's obviously the visual aspect of it. Seeing a bunch of ghosts follow you around with this rainbow-like pattern is inherently entertaining to watch. And the fact that the ghosts perfectly follow you creates this sense of control in the player that wasn't there previously. Because I'm sure you noticed already, but typically in Pac-Man, the ghosts sort of move around the map with their own logic. And as you can see, while there are still a couple stray ghosts that'll behave like they used to, a majority of the ghosts in this game follow the conga line pattern. This takes a lot of the unpredictability unpredictability out of Pac-Man, which I believe makes it more fun because you do feel more in control, and when you're more in control, the game feels more fair, and as a result, success is more rewarding and failure feels justified. So what? You got the ghost following you around. Well, you gotta remember, this is Pac-Man, which means that at some point you get access to a power pellet that the game conveniently places in a certain pattern, and then you get to turn around and bite into every single one of them, and this is the culmination of Pac-Man Championship Edition DX. The way the game phrases with each bite and the sound effect that goes higher and higher and higher, it's simply the crescendo of the game loop. It's the release of the tension that you get from being chased around by the ghost for a while. And the game's high speed means that this process repeats several times per game, creating a near never-ending loop of tension, release, and dopamine to your brain. And as I just mentioned, the sound design plays a massive role in this. Not only do you have that biting sound that goes higher and higher in pitch, or that ding 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 sound whenever you get a certain amount of points, or you get an extra life as well, but this game might just have some of the best sound choices as a whole. Obviously the pellet sound is classic, but you've also got the sound that plays every time a ghost joins the line, that whooshing sound whenever you go into slow motion, and that weird bulky swallowing like sound after the bite. There's just some really great sound design in this, and the soundtrack also helps. You get to listen to a really fresh flavor even to this day of drum and bass and electronica that's very repetitive, but in a way that fits the gameplay and somehow never gets tiresome. There's not even that many tracks. I swear when I'm playing the game, I'm only hearing a couple songs, but they're all so memorable and non-intrusive at the same time. They're really well written that it just doesn't bother me at all that there's so few of them. Maybe I just haven't unlocked more. I don't know. I haven't played this game quite enough as of late, so maybe I've forgotten some things. But still, the music fits the action perfectly, and I genuinely couldn't think of anything else that could work. Like, this is lightning in a bottle. And going back to the gameplay for a bit, there's something I forgot to mention earlier, and that is the fact that the levels actually transform. The mazes aren't static. Every couple of times you get one of those badges, the layout of the maze on one of the two sides will change. And that really doesn't affect the gameplay as much as you might think, because it's mostly based on quick reaction times anyway, and you don't really memorize it too much. But it does tap into my love of terraforming in stages and that feeling of development, of progression as you're going through a level, even if all of the action is on a single screen. It also helps keep the gameplay varied, obviously, because it could probably get a little bit too repetitive if it was just the same layout the entire time. And finally, there's the visuals. Now, if you've watched my Nitronic Rush video, you probably know that I do quite enjoy that Tron neon-like aesthetic. And I never really thought about it too much, but Pac-Man was one of the first games to apply it. It's just that it didn't have any bloom back then, so you couldn't really tell. But no, this has some very strong club vibes in terms of its color palette and obviously the music as well. While you might think that the colors for this game might get a little bit garish, I think they're really fitting, and they have just the right level of saturation to be catching but still easy on the eyes. I never get fatigued with this game. Plus, you can always customize the visuals. There's actually a bunch of different visual themes you can choose from. In this video, I've only chosen 2 because I'm only doing 2 events, but there's actually a lot more than that. There's a few that are even more minimalist, some that are more retro, and there's even this one that's based off Pac-Man The Ghostly Adventures, but I don't know why you'd ever use that one. You can even mix and match the different elements, like the sprites from one and the background of another. Nowadays, I'm a little bit boring and I just use the presets that work together, but when I first played this game, I mix and matched all the time. Also, I'm not gonna lie, there's this one visual scheme for the game that takes inspiration from Pac-Mania. It has like the pseudo 3D look. I didn't use it for the video, obviously, because it's a bit of a polarizing choice, but I personally really like it. I know it's kind of unpopular to like Pac-Man looking that way, but I don't know, there's something about that space that makes the game almost easier to play. And the best thing is, if you only like, let's say, the more 3D looking environment but still want the 2D sprites, well, you can make it that way. And if you think the game is a little bit too easy, try using the Atari 2600 inspired one. Okay, I'm not sure if it specifically takes inspiration from that system, but you know, it has this very pixel art sort of look to it. I'm not gonna lie, the heavy interlacing on it and just that grid-like pattern that it has because of the way it's drawn makes the game way harder to play. Honestly, it's the only time that my eyes eyes get tired playing this game just because that's really hard to look at. I may not mind low resolutions or low res graphics too much. I mean, that inspired one of my most popular videos. But when I have the choice between that or some nice, clean, minimalist visuals, I know which I'm gonna pick. So those are some of my thoughts on Pac-Man Championship Edition DX. Did you know I never even knew there was an original Championship Edition, not DX? It's kind of like what happened with Underground 2 or Hot Pursuit 2. I was just like, what? There was an original? No way. But yeah, this game was addicting as hell, and I think it made it pretty clear why. Thank you so much for watching another episode of Vivid Noise. I'll see you guys next time.